In 1808, a law was passed that forever changed the face of American slavery. The transatlantic slave trade, the brutal system that had brought millions of Africans to the Americas, was officially banned. Yet, instead of bringing an end to the suffering, it marked the beginning of a new and deeply disturbing chapter within the borders of the United States. Without the ability to import enslaved people from abroad, plantation owners in the American South faced a growing problem: how to maintain and expand their labor force in a system that relied entirely on human bondage. Their answer was chillingly calculated. If new people could no longer be brought across the ocean, they would be born on American soil. Enslaved men and women, already denied freedom and identity, were now seen as a means to an end, a way to reproduce wealth. Children born into bondage would grow to work the fields, build the plantations, and continue the cycle of labor that kept the Southern economy alive. Across sprawling estates and hidden corners of the South, a silent industry began to take shape. Enslaved families were torn apart, and human lives were measured not by their worth as people but by their potential to produce more laborers. The promise of freedom that the ban had symbolized was quickly replaced by a new form of control, one that turned natural life itself into property. It was an era that exposed the darkest corners of human greed, where compassion was replaced by calculation and generations were condemned to serve a system that profited from their very existence. This practice, often hidden in the shadows of history, reveals the extent to which oppression evolved to preserve power. Today, many still struggle to confront this uncomfortable truth. It is a story often left out of history books, a part of the past that challenges how we remember the foundations of a nation. But understanding this history is essential. It reminds us of the strength of those who endured and the need to face the injustices that shaped the world we live in. If you want to uncover more hidden stories like this one, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more untold chapters of history that deserve to be remembered. In the years following the ban on the transatlantic slave trade, a silent transformation swept through the American South. Plantations, once dependent on ships from across the ocean, began to look inward for a new source of labor. What followed was not written in ledgers or recorded in speeches, but lived in the shadows of the plantations, where human relationships were reshaped into something cold, calculated, and deeply tragic. Within these plantations, enslaved men and women became more than just workers in the fields. They were seen as living investments, people whose very existence could generate more wealth. Marriages, partnerships, and even parenthood were no longer matters of personal choice. Instead, they were dictated by the ambitions of those who owned them. A young man might be chosen for his strength, a woman for her health or youth. Together, they were told to form a union, not out of affection, but out of obligation. Plantation owners and overseers watched these lives unfold like a cruel experiment, measuring the worth of human beings in the number of children they might bring into the world. Every birth meant another generation bound to the land, another name written into the inventory of a master's fortune. The human cost of this system was immense. Bonds of love were replaced with fear and uncertainty. Some tried to form families despite the cruelty around them, hoping that affection could survive in a place built on control. Others resisted in quiet ways, through prayer, song, or the refusal to accept the roles imposed on them. But the system was relentless. It turned what should have been the most personal and sacred parts of life into tools for economic gain. In the stillness of the night, stories were whispered among those who endured it. Women spoke of the sorrow of being separated from their children, of seeing loved ones sent away to distant plantations. Men carried the heavy knowledge that their strength, once a symbol of survival, was being used to sustain the very system that enslaved them. Yet, even in the midst of this darkness, there were moments of quiet defiance. Families tried to hold on to one another, to name their children with hope and meaning, to keep alive the humanity that others tried to erase. Their resilience became an act of resistance, a statement that no system, no matter how cruel, could fully destroy the human spirit. Today, when we look back on this chapter of history, it forces us to confront the ways in which power and greed can twist the natural bonds between people. It reveals a world where profit was placed above compassion, and where generations were shaped by decisions made in the name of control. But it also reveals something else: the endurance of those who survived. Their stories, though often untold, remind us that humanity can persist even under the harshest conditions. Their courage to live, love, and hope despite everything stands as a quiet testament to the strength that history tried to erase. These are the voices that deserve to be remembered, the ones that history nearly silenced, yet continue to echo through time, asking us never to forget. In the deep South of the 19th century, the value of a human life was measured not by dreams, skills, or spirit, but by how much profit it could produce. On vast plantations stretching across the horizon, a child's first cry was not greeted with celebration or joy, it was recorded as an addition to an owner's wealth. Each birth meant another set of hands to labor in the fields, another life to be owned, traded, and counted among the assets that sustained the Southern economy. Slaveholders kept meticulous records, not only of crops and harvests but of people, their ages, strengths, and most disturbingly, their ability to bear or father children. A young woman's worth could rise if she was believed capable of bringing many children into the world. These children, born into captivity, represented years of future labor, a living inheritance of wealth that required no purchase, only the control of human lives. The language of business replaced the language of humanity. Account books spoke of increase, a word that masked the reality behind it, the birth of enslaved children destined to work the same fields as their parents. To the enslavers, these births were investments. To the enslaved, they were another generation bound by the same unyielding chains. On many plantations, this system became so deeply rooted that entire strategies were built around it. Owners encouraged or demanded unions among the enslaved, offering small incentives or privileges to those who produced children. Some even calculated a woman's value by the number of births she had, treating her body as a means of expanding their property. It was a practice that stripped away dignity, turning the natural cycle of life into an economic machine. But beyond the ledgers and profits, there were stories of quiet heartbreak and endurance. Mothers tried to protect their children, knowing the world that awaited them. Fathers worked the fields with the burden of knowing that no effort could secure freedom for their families. Each generation grew up under the shadow of a system that saw them not as people but as potential laborers to be exploited. Still, the human spirit found ways to resist. Songs carried messages of hope through the air, prayers whispered in secret spoke of freedom and deliverance. Families formed despite the odds, clinging to love as the only thing no one could buy or sell. Every embrace, every act of care, was a silent rebellion against the world that tried to reduce them to numbers in a book. The plantation economy thrived on these lives, but it was built on suffering, a prosperity paid for with generations of stolen futures. When history speaks of the wealth of the South, of cotton and tobacco and grand estates, it often forgets the true source of that abundance. It forgets the children born into bondage, whose labor sustained the empire of the fields. Today, the ledgers and records still exist, silent witnesses to a time when life itself was treated as currency. Yet behind every entry was a human being, someone who laughed, cried, hoped, and dreamed. Remembering their stories reminds us that even in a world that sought to turn life into profit, humanity endured. Their legacy is not one of numbers or ownership, but of survival against impossible odds, a testament to the resilience of the human soul. In the heart of the American South, where the fields stretched endlessly beneath the burning sun, lived women whose lives were not their own. They rose before dawn, worked through the heat, and endured the weight of a world that saw them not as human beings, not as daughters or mothers, but as instruments of labor and reproduction. Their bodies were not theirs to protect or to cherish, they were claimed by others, turned into property for profit. On the plantations, a woman's strength was measured by how much she could bear, both in toil and in life itself. Many were young, their futures decided long before they could dream of them. Plantation owners looked upon them not with compassion, but with calculation. Each woman was valued for the children she might bring into the world, for every new life meant more hands to work the fields and more wealth to claim. There was no choice in this existence. Decisions about marriage, motherhood, or rest were taken from them. The natural rhythms of life were replaced with commands from those in power. They were forced into relationships that served the needs of the plantation, not the desires of their hearts. And when a child was born, joy was often shadowed by fear, the fear that the child could be taken away, sold, or sent to another land before they could even speak the word mother. Despite the harshness of this world, these women carried within them an extraordinary strength. They nurtured their children in secret moments, whispering songs of hope, telling stories of freedom that had survived across generations. They found ways to protect one another, forming bonds that defied the system meant to break them. Their love became an act of quiet resistance, a declaration that even in the darkest conditions, their humanity could not be erased. In the eyes of history, their suffering was often overlooked, hidden behind the ledgers and records of plantation business. Yet their experiences reveal the true cruelty of a system that sought to control not only labor but life itself. Every pregnancy, every loss, every act of endurance was part of a greater struggle, one that spoke to the resilience of the human spirit against the cold machinery of greed. Some of these women became symbols of defiance, their courage whispered about in stories passed down through families. They found ways to survive, to hold on to pieces of their identity that no one could steal. Their strength lived on in their children, who carried forward the legacy of endurance and quiet power. When we reflect on this history today, we must see more than the cruelty, we must also see the courage. These women, denied control over their own bodies, still found ways to nurture, to hope, and to fight for a future they might never see. They remind us that dignity cannot be erased by ownership, and that love, even when born in suffering, can become a force stronger than oppression. Their stories are not just tales of pain, they are testaments of survival. Through them, we are reminded that history's darkest chapters often reveal its greatest strength, the unyielding will of those who refuse to be broken. In the quiet dawn of the American South, the plantation stirred to life long before the sun touched the horizon. For many families living there, each morning began with uncertainty, because at any moment, a name could be called, a life could change forever. The sound of footsteps approaching the cabins often meant more than work. It could mean separation, loss, or the end of a family's fragile togetherness. On the auction blocks of the South, human lives were priced and traded like goods. A child's laughter, a mother's embrace, a father's strength, none of it mattered against the value set in a ledger. Families built on love and resilience were torn apart with a few words or the stroke of a pen. A mother might hold her child one moment and watch them taken away the next, never to be seen again. The cries that followed were swallowed by the noise of the market, by the indifference of those who saw profit where there should have been compassion. For the enslaved, love was both a blessing and a burden. They loved knowing that at any time, that love could be used against them. Many chose to marry in secret, creating ceremonies in the woods under moonlight, where vows were exchanged not with rings but with whispered promises. These unions were acts of courage, declarations of humanity in a world that refused to recognize it. But even these sacred bonds could not stop the power of commerce. When debts needed to be paid or land expanded, people were sold, husbands sent in one direction, wives in another, children scattered among distant plantations. The heartache of these separations became part of everyday life, a wound that never truly healed. Still, the hope of reunion endured. Some carried small tokens, bits of fabric, pieces of wood, or names whispered like prayers, to remember those they had lost. There are stories passed down through generations of parents who walked miles at night, trying to catch a final glimpse of the children taken from them. Of songs sung quietly in the fields, each verse a message of love meant for someone far away. These songs became a lifeline, a way to remember, a promise that love could outlast even the cruelty of separation. The system thrived on control, and dividing families was one of its strongest weapons. By breaking bonds of kinship, enslavers sought to weaken the spirit of the people they held captive. Yet, the opposite often occurred. Each loss deepened their will to survive, to remember, and to resist in any way they could. Love became an act of defiance, memory a form of resistance. Today, when we look back on this history, it is not only the cruelty that stands out, it is the endurance. The families who were separated left behind something powerful, a legacy of faith and resilience that transcended generations. The descendants of those once torn apart still carry the echoes of their strength, proof that love can survive even the harshest efforts to destroy it. These were not nameless people lost to history. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, bound together by love stronger than chains, stronger than distance. Their stories remind us that even when the world sought to divide them, the bonds they forged in their hearts could never be truly broken. Long after the fields grew quiet and the chains were gone, the memories remained. They lingered in the stories whispered around fires, in the silence that followed certain questions, and in the eyes of those who carried the weight of what their ancestors endured. The pain of generations did not vanish when freedom was declared, it lived on in the minds and hearts of those who had been shaped by a world that had once normalized cruelty. For centuries, entire families had been torn apart, their lives dictated by forces beyond their control. Children grew up watching their parents taken away, not understanding why love could not protect them. Mothers learned to love carefully, fearing that affection might make the inevitable separation even harder to bear. Fathers carried invisible wounds, their spirits scarred by the knowledge that they could not shield their families from the reach of a system built on domination. The damage was not only physical, it was emotional, spiritual, generational. When people are denied their humanity for so long, the pain seeps into every part of their existence. Those who survived did so by finding ways to adapt, to endure, to keep hope alive in a world that gave them little reason to. Yet even survival came with a price. The constant exposure to cruelty created a kind of numbness, a defense mechanism against grief too deep to name. In time, the cycle of suffering became a quiet inheritance. Children born after the end of slavery still carried its shadow. The trauma passed down through families, through the stories they told, and through the ones they could not bear to speak. Many grew up hearing fragments of the past, a grandmother's distant stare, a father's silence about his own parents, a warning to be careful, to stay strong, to never forget where they came from. These were echoes of an experience that shaped more than just individuals, it shaped a culture of endurance. Communities built from the remnants of that past learned to find healing in unity. Churches became sanctuaries where grief could finally be voiced, and music became a language of remembrance. Through song, people transformed pain into something that could be shared and understood. Each melody carried both sorrow and resilience, a reflection of hearts that refused to surrender. But the scars did not fade easily. Generations continued to wrestle with the emotional legacy of a system that had normalized violence and broken trust. The effects could be seen in the fear of loss, in the guardedness that sometimes replaced tenderness, and in the struggle to rebuild what had been taken, the sense of belonging, of safety, of self-worth. Yet, amid the pain, there was also strength. Every family that endured, every voice that survived to tell the story, was proof that humanity had outlasted brutality. The scars became reminders, not only of suffering, but of survival. They told the world that even when compassion was stripped away, people still found ways to hold on to love, dignity, and hope. Today, when we speak of those who lived through this dark history, we honor more than their pain, we honor their endurance. Their courage to live, to rebuild, and to dream again stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. What they carried was heavy, but what they left behind was powerful, a legacy of strength born from unimaginable hardship, and a reminder that healing begins with remembrance. For generations, the story of what happened on those plantations has been pushed to the margins of history books, hidden beneath polite silence and selective memory. It is easier, perhaps, for a nation to celebrate its progress than to confront the shadows that linger behind it. Yet the past does not disappear simply because it is ignored, it leaves traces that echo through time, shaping the way people live, speak, and understand one another even today. The legacy of this forgotten chapter can still be felt in the struggles for equality and justice that define modern America. The deep wounds carved by centuries of dehumanization did not heal with the stroke of a pen or the passing of a law. They settled into the structure of society, influencing how people are seen, treated, and valued. Conversations about race, gender, and human rights are not only about the present, they are about the remnants of a history that has never been fully reckoned with. For the descendants of those who endured, remembering is both painful and necessary. Their ancestors' strength, their endurance, and their defiance became the roots of a culture that refused to be broken. Through art, music, and storytelling, they continue to reclaim voices that history tried to silence. Each story told today is an act of remembrance, a way to restore dignity to lives once reduced to property, and a reminder that truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always rise again. As time moves forward, the challenge is not just to remember, but to understand, to see the connections between past and present, to recognize how history still breathes beneath the surface of modern life. Only by facing it with honesty can healing begin. The lessons of this era are not confined to dusty archives or distant memories, they live within the ongoing fight for compassion, equality, and justice for all. To know this history is to see the strength of those who came before us and to carry their legacy with purpose. Their suffering was immense, but so was their resilience. By remembering them, we do not dwell in tragedy, we honor survival. If this story moved you, help keep these memories alive. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories that deserve to be told. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are tonight, may you rest peacefully, knowing that remembering the past is how we build a kinder future. Good night.